Before we get into today's episode, don't forget to sign up to the book and the VIP newsletter at thehighestandbestuse.com. For the book, you can get that at Amazon, Chapters, Barnes & Noble, all of these places in paperback, ebook, hardcover, and of course now the Audible version as well. So grab the book, sign up to the VIP newsletter, thehighestandbestuse.com, and now to today's episode.
Hi, I'm Dan Romanko. The highest and best use for our business is leveraging good urban design for our clients.
Thanks for tuning into the Highest and Best Use Real Estate Podcast, where we talk techniques to optimize your land, structure, skill sets, and time, as well as the highest and best use principles to make your business more profitable, productive, and efficient. I'm your host, Ryan Carr, reminding you that good deals are found, great deals are created. And my guest today, Dan Romanko, Curtis Thompson from Better Neighborhoods. I'm super excited to have these guys here. Curtis is a planner, development manager, and an investor at Better Neighborhoods. And Dan is a partner as well as a planner at Better Neighborhoods. And I'm super happy to have you guys in the studio today. This is great.
Likewise.
Thanks for having us.
You know, one of the reasons I do the show is to meet new folks. And when I saw you, Curtis, on social media, I was like, how do I reach out to these guys and get them on? Because your stuff is so good.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm really happy to have you in the studio today.
Yeah, thanks. We're delighted to be here.
Yeah. So we'll kick it off and get into a little bit about who you guys are. For the show today, I want to talk about strategic residential development with respect to infill projects, subdivisions, and high rise. And I know you guys have just a depth of knowledge. I was checking out your website, and you guys you've been around forever. So it's really exciting to have you here.
Yeah, great.
Kick it off. Tell us a little bit about yourself and Better Neighborhoods.
I'm a planner. I've been a planner for about 25 years. I met my partner about 23 years ago, and we joined forces about 7 years ago, and took his company, which was Bar Associates, and renamed it into Better Neighborhoods. And
Nice.
So since that time, we've grown and done and our focus has been to do projects that we believe in, and we're pretty principled in doing that. We are focused on doing projects that subscribe to the principles of new urbanism or traditional neighborhood development. And if you don't know exactly what that is, it's basically anything pre-Second World War. So, if you think of walkable, diverse neighborhoods, often tree-lined streets, front porches, that type of thing, those are the type of neighborhoods that we want to do again. And we've kind of lost the technology over the years, and so there's been a resurgence. The organization that we most subscribe to is the Congress for New Urbanism. Several of our staff are accredited with them, and we are trying to change the default way of development across Southern Ontario. I mean, that's essentially our mission.
Wow, that's a great perspective.
Yeah.
Wow.
So,
and what about you, Curtis?
I'm a professional planner as well in Ontario, so I've been practicing for about 8 years now. I've been with Better Neighborhoods just going on 2 years now. That was one of the reasons I was drawn to the firm, was kind of like the principal development grounds that Dan and Glenn have been operating on, and some of the past projects that they've done. Certainly really good showcases in the Niagara area. Yeah. So that's where I came from.
That's neat. And I love the fact that, like, when you came on board, your vision is what drew him to come and be part of this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, that's impressive. I think a leader with a vision is so important.
Yeah, thanks. We've been very successful in attracting staff who believe in what we're doing and are there to really make a difference. And it's more the application of sort of some of the great planning theory that they've learned in school, but I think a lot of planners get disillusioned when they practice planning because oftentimes it becomes just sort of regulating a process. And, I would say almost every planner is idealistic. They want this, they get into planning because they want to change the world and have these utopian ideas of what that looks like. And yet they find themselves in these places where they're actually just regulating a process and checking boxes.
Yeah.
And so the creativity and the impact that you think the profession is going to have on the world really isn't as realized as it could be.
Do you think that's the case over multiple professions? I feel like a lot of people can get into that like checkbox mentality where it's like, okay, I'm a lawyer, these are my things, and I check the box. Or I'm a planner, I lose the creativity, I just push paper. Or you know what I mean? Like I'm an accountant, I just have to do the taxes. Do you think a lot of people lose that flavor and that flair over the years, like they get jaded, or what happens?
I think there's some systemic pressures that really influence the way things are done. And I think, as organizations grow, particularly municipalities, they're concerned about liability. They're concerned about, things coming back on them. So they develop policies, and we over-regulate ourselves through that process. And so we're always looking to streamline the ways of doing things. And I mean, most businesses operate in doing that and establishing processes so that they can be more efficient. But, you have to keep your focus on what you're really trying to accomplish. And if you lose sight of that through the process, then, you just have to change the process. And
That's true.
Oftentimes it's a question of not being able to recognize that that's happening, or, recognizing that there's a better way of doing things. So we all kind of get stuck in those traps, right?
It's true. Progress.
Yeah.
Progress is good. Well, that's the whole fundamental basis of planning. It's like, how can we do something better than what we maybe didn't do in the past?
Right.
Or whatever we did do, how do we expand on that? So why don't we take this into infill builds as our first talking point? Do you guys get into infill development? We'll start with you, Chris.
Predominantly, that's like most of what we do. Tend to focus on things in the built-up urban area. And like building on that point, it's we oftentimes run up against those rules and stuff, and it's like, well, we're just doing it for the sake of blindly following the rules. And I literally brought this up at a hearing last night. I'm like we should be doing what's right, and like if we don't like the rules and we're doing these applications, like sometimes it's worth rewriting that rule. Right. And then that's how we get some of these great projects, and we love these neighborhoods that existed before a lot of that modern bureaucracy we have was even created. Yeah. And we can't somehow go back to that. So
do you ever ask yourself that? Okay, you guys have, except not you guys, but like maybe one particular city, pick a city, has taken in hundreds of minor variances for the same thing. And you're like, okay, if you guys are granting approval for the same variance over and over, why are you clogging up the arteries, like the political arteries, to just keep approving the same thing when you can just rewrite the zoning?
Yeah.
And be done with it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there's efficiencies there that you probably keep bumping into all the time that you could just overcome.
There's certainly a lot of frustrations in the business. Yeah.
What is infill development?
So infill development is making use of underutilized or vacant properties within the fixed boundary of the urban area, and repurposing those properties for a higher or better use on the properties that are contextually compatible with the neighborhood or the direction that the planning policy documents are leaning towards. So, there's all kinds of opportunities that those look like different things in different contexts. And I would say that's one of the most important facets of urban planning is having context-sensitive development.
Yep.
Where it's appropriate. In some places, for example, there are, higher order transit situations or proximity to commercial nodes, which maybe infer a different type of development than something that is more removed from neighborhood centers, for example, that, you can do a single lot severance, which is a different scale of development for infill, right? Mm-hmm. So
character of the neighborhood. As planners, how you mentioned character, so we'll go contextual to that.
Okay.
How important is character given a specific development in an existing neighborhood? Maybe Curtis, you want to take this one?
I don't know. The word subjective is just flashing. It is one of the most subjective things, and it is every time there's development applications, and about the infamous NIMBYism, and it's not this to completely. It's just there's merit on both sides, but the term character and established neighborhood, like these things find their way into policy documents that municipalities have, and unfortunately they get weaponized as a means to basically stop and shrink wrap neighborhoods and stop further housing from coming in. And it's unfortunately like a word that shouldn't be seen as a bad word for planners and developers and builders and stuff, as it's been mischaracterized and used to prevent things from coming in. It's like the character of our neighborhoods is evolving, like our cities are organisms, like they're growing, and it's just that to me, character is a tough one, because it means different things to different people. It means built form, it means architecture, it means streetscape design, a big one, urban design, landscaping. Like it's not easy to pinpoint.
Yeah, I got stuck in a character study one time. I did a corner lot severance, right? Severed the backyard off, kept the house on the corner. Fine. They made me do a character study on the existing house. And I said, this house was built 100. What could be more character of the neighborhood than the house that is the character of the neighborhood? And they go, oh, we gotta study it. I said, oh, okay, well, here's $5,000. Like, see ya. Right? I might as well have lit the $5,000 on fire in a drum.
Yeah.
Because I said, guys, like, it can't be any more character than the existing character. And they go, well, we got to do the thing.
That's a good point. I mean, we often try and make sure that we retain the existing dwellings. And economically, it makes more sense, too. I mean, why would you remove it and have to reconstruct a new house, expense the demolition part of it? Oftentimes it's tricky. I mean, the houses aren't always in the right spot, right? Especially if you're doing a severance. But it's generally better value to keep the house where it is and work around it. And so we've done some very innovative infill sites, some of them even of a heritage nature, where we've kept the existing house and built new homes around that.
So let's talk about that. Let's do a case study and break it down.
So, it's important to recognize the features of the characteristics of the heritage value, and those differ depending on what you're starting with. And then, again, it's all contextual. So depending on how much land you have to work with will determine how the infill can be arranged. And so it does require some innovation, and often you're essentially breaking all the rules with respect to zoning. So, there's going to be a variance or zoning approval down the line at some point.
Because the zoning bylaw was written 30 years ago.
Or I mean, let's face it, nothing fits in that little box that the zoning prescribes, right? So we do imply a lot of innovation. We often start by designing the footprints of the homes, and we think in terms of designing for the end user first, right? Those are the people that are going to live there. Do they have appropriate amenity spaces? Are these house footprints appropriate for the livable unit? What's the kind of market that's appropriate? So those questions are asked up front.
Price point a thing too?
To a certain extent, I would say, but just more in terms of marketing and in terms of who's going to live there.
Okay.
I wouldn't say price is a driving point. I think a lot of times the work that we do is really focused on good urban design, and I would say that because there is a shortfall of products out there that do offer good urban design, that we've found in our experience that when you do focus on that, what ends up happening is they become so desirable that they price themselves so high in the market and they retain their value over time. So we did we've been working on a large infill project in St. Catharines for some time. I think the site's about 14 acres. It's 9 phases, and it's really like a legacy project for us. It's about 20 years strong now. Wow. But we started with this idea of creating as much diversity, and it's largely townhouses. There's some 4-story apartments, and then an 6-story apartment now with underground parking. That one's geared towards seniors. So we've integrated a whole bunch of housing modalities for different people. Okay, and that was intentional. Right. What's happened though is that because we've developed such good urban design criteria and built it, which is another critical part, we've actually been able to implement it. So it's one thing to get approval, it's quite another thing to actually be able to build it and implement it.
Here it is.
You'd be surprised at the retail value of those homes now, and they're not. I mean, they're townhomes. They're decent size. Some of them are quite modest, and yet their valuation over their suburban counterparts are considerably greater. And it has everything to do with the neighborhood. So if you think of the principles of real estate, location, and you put your emphasis on the public realm, which is the neighborhood, which is the location, and you contribute, then all boats rise with the tide. So
that's a good point.
So that's really kind of how we approach things philosophically, and in doing that, we believe we're being more socially equitable. We're providing a diversity of housing types. We're providing a range of affordability. From the developer's perspective, ultimately, we're creating greater value. We're creating products that they now have to offer that the rest of the market doesn't. I mean, when you're competing with snout houses all day long.
What's a snout house?
Oh, it's a garage forward house.
A snout house.
Yeah, so it's when you like have to really
you can't
search
find the
to find the front door.
That's hilarious. I've never heard of this. Snout house.
Yeah, so you see those, they're ubiquitous in suburban neighborhoods.
Yeah.
So, when you put the emphasis on the street and the porch and the pedestrian scaled environments, these are the places that you'd find in most every municipality that are the older, charming neighborhoods, right? And everybody knows them. Everybody loves them, right? And yet we don't build them anymore. Why?
Yeah. I think it's the cost of land. Would you agree or disagree?
No, I don't think it's the cost of land. No.
Well, look, you take a 50-foot lot and you've got one Victorian farmhouse in the middle.
Yeah.
Like somebody would say, well, we could cut that into 2, or we could put up an 8-plex or something. Like at what point do you say, okay, the value of the dirt supersedes what's currently there, such that there's a better use for that dirt?
Do you want to feel that?
I think it's a couple prongs. I feel like it's the cost of land, cost of construction, the cost of time as well, and making things happen. I'm thinking of another thing we got approval for, and it was preserving the existing house, but they're actually severing it. Unfortunately, the house is in a bad spot.
Yeah.
The property happens all the time, but instead of, in this case, picking it up and moving it on the same lot, and the juice has to be worth the squeeze. But yeah, I don't know. It's a tough one to answer. I think land cost is definitely a huge factor, and we, the value proposition of doing the traditional neighborhood development is one that we consistently have with our clients, like over time, like the clients that we tend to keep working with will come around to the idea. They see the light, they see it's worked for them, and money can be made. So yeah, that's in our opinion, the value proposition is building that neighborhood for the end too, and the future value that provides.
Where do you guys think the money's made in infill development? Is it in the construction? Is it in planning the land correctly? Like, where do you think the money is made? Like, where's the juice?
I would say it's in the design phase.
Design phase.
Yeah, I think if you have a good concept that is well thought through, is maximizing what you believe you can get approval for at the early onset. I mean, we always design for ADUs now for any new.
And when you say design, are you talking site design? Are you talking structure design? Aesthetics?
Both house and site design, because they have to work in tandem, and they, oftentimes the biggest impediment to any development yield is the parking. So you have to address that. And so it does require a creative way of dealing with parking. And I think from an urban design perspective, that is the single most aspect of providing better urban design, is finding a way to deal with the cars. And even justifying whether you need them at all in some cases. So
what's your perspectives on this? So like, if you've got a suburban neighborhood, not a downtown core, not a Manhattan, not a Toronto, not a Paris, but an outlier community, do you think that, we're talking like broad strokes here, but like generally, do people still need cars, or is this kind of a thing where we're transitioning into public transit where that becomes more important, thereby giving us more density?
Well, we do. If I could go first.
Yeah,
we do a lot of zoning applications to reduce, if not eliminate, parking.
Okay.
It definitely depends on the municipality a bit. Some of them are a bit more progressive on that front, like at a staff level or at a committee or a council level. So that's something we're always trying to keep tabs on, and it's a bit of a dance every time. But I know in St. Catharines and Welland, and I mean, I've even, like, some of my rental properties, I'm not even trying to market to tenants without cars, and sometimes they just come. Like, and there's a good proportion of the population in any municipality that either is not physically able to drive a car, is not of an age to drive a car, or for financial reasons. So one of the things I'm always peddling when we're trying to justify a parking reduction is, like, it comes down to like a matter of privilege. Like, so we're forcing somebody to provide fork up land and build these parking stalls, which will in fact raise the cost of housing. And, we should be leaving it up to the applicant in many cases. Like who decides on that number of how many stalls is an appropriate number of stalls? Like, some of our clients are rolling out more innovative things like car share on larger scale projects. There's shared parking lots we're looking at for some other projects. So there's a lot of different ways to skin the cat, and just, basically providing too much parking hasn't been panning out too well for us. It actually induces traffic, which is the ironic part, because everyone's like, oh, there's going to be traffic. It's like, well, if you provide a place for the cars to go, they're going to get there.
They're going to give it, yeah.
So
it's kind of a cat and mouse, right?
Yeah, like it's yeah.
I heard a story the other day about Yorkville? Which is it? The mall in Toronto,
I think.
Yeah. So they were talking about taking up, and I don't know if this is fact or not, but it was floating around. They were talking about reducing the parking space in the mall, buying a parking lot somewhere else, and because cars will become self-driving, now they can have less parking, still service the same amount of people, and send the cars away. And when you're done shopping, call your car back.
Yeah.
That's very progressive. Like, we're not even there yet, but they're thinking like years in advance.
Yeah, I think generally speaking, we are moving towards less cars.
Yeah.
Some of that technology still needs to be proven, obviously.
Sure.
And the support for transit is coming. But you're right. I mean, in the interim, we still have developed communities and the infrastructure that does require a lot of people to use their car. Yeah. I don't know that building more highways is the right direction. I would say that we should be investing more in public transit and some of those things that will help move people in a more efficient manner. But the issue with urban planning is that transportation rather, and land use are so intrinsically tied together that until we start to build neighborhoods that can support more walkable places and diversity within uses, so that people can live that 15-minute city life and or drop a car, then we've kind of boxed them into that, as Curtis says, this eliminating populations that just simply don't drive or can't afford to drive, or and so we've really,
if you look at the cost of a car, to purchase it, finance it, whatever, maintain it, put in fuel, change the oil, all this, like on an annual basis, it is not an inexpensive feat.
Not at all.
It's right behind a mortgage, like for some people, especially when they're financing $80,000 cars. When like
the other thing is, when you think about how we use spaces for cars, we're effectively saying we're choosing the storage of cars over housing, and using the real estate accordingly. So if you think it as like a farmer is yielding his property, and he's growing a crop, what are you going to grow, like in terms of what makes most sense from a land use perspective?
That's true,
right? So these are all the questions we have to ask. I mean, getting back to your earlier question, I think a lot of zoning bylaws are really outdated in their zoning regulations for parking. There is a shift, but we still have a bit of a gap, and it's a chicken and egg sort of thing in terms of how we get there.
Whoa. Before we get back to the episode, don't forget to sign up to the VIP newsletter at thehighestandbestuse.com. You get great tips and tricks there, completely free. Also, don't forget to grab a copy of the book at thehighestandbestuse.com, Amazon Chapters, Barnes & Noble, all of these places. That's where you can get it. You can get it in paperback, ebook, hardcover edition, as well as the Audible version too. So if you like to consume content by audio version, grab that. If you like paper, grab it there too. And now back to the episode. How do you guys think Bill 23 has affected what's happened in the last 6 months, especially in the province of Ontario?
That's a good question. You want to feel that?
Kurt?
Well, we chat. Bill 23 is always a hot topic in the planning community. Like, and we chat about it with our municipal planning colleagues as well.
It's such a mixed vibe from the municipal staff level, because the government basically just shoved it down their throat and said, "Here, you're getting it."
Yeah.
And they're going, "Oh, what do I do?"
Right.
I think like there's a lot of mixed opinion. Like there's, in my personal opinion, I think like some things had to be done. Like I think I like where they went with the second dwelling units. They've pretty much, municipalities were dragging their feet on this for years because the legislation has been around, but it was never really clear and forceful. And they kind of they're like, enough is enough. And they just overrode the zoning. I feel like that was due. I don't know how I feel about some of the other regulations that were put in place, and getting some of the conservation authorities. Like I'm kind of like on the fence about some of the other stuff, but even eliminating site plan approval, there's some good and bad things about where that came from. Some of the municipalities were really, milking it, and so I think they needed to kind of tighten up a bit. But we're hearing from our municipal colleagues that they're going to get creative and start finding other ways to get, so
to get what.
To get what they want. Like, it's about
from the municipal level
regulating, like architectural design or landscaping, or and
is it
there
true
is some merit.
They can't impose architectural control? Is that true? I've heard both sides to this. Like on an infill build, they can or cannot impose architecture as a condition of the severance.
Well, we've been with municipalities that try to control that through development agreements.
Right.
And it is a gray area. I don't know that they have a lot of teeth in it, but they do try to exercise some of that authority to ensure.
If you took it to the tribunal and you said to the adjudicator, can you or can you not exercise authority over whether I use brick or siding, what would they say?
I don't know.
I don't think they can.
I don't know how it would hold up. Like they may have official plan policies that support it, and that's how they got there. But I don't know with the new legislation how things have changed on that front.
Right.
And I don't know if anything's been challenged yet. And a lot of the times our clients don't want to be the guinea pig and find out. So
the first guy takes all the bullets, right?
Yeah,
that's the tough part.
Mm-hmm. So sometimes it's just you just kind of play ball and you just go with it reluctantly. It's I mean they picked 10 units to exempt on site plan, which we immediately found out were helping us on some applications, but I don't know how that number came up. It seems kind of arbitrary, but
can they still control the site though? I mean, they have to be able to. Like, where's the water going?
Like, yeah, like there's.
Like, can they still have some pull? Like, it's not just the Wild West.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about on the one. We're like, how are they going to regulate? Like, there's got to be some basic stormwater management. Sure. Like, it's outside of the building code in some cases. So, to be determined.
So what does that mean now? So less than 10 units. No site plan control. Great. I'm all for that. Anything less restrictive, I'm for. Great. But like, what does that mean now? Who controls some of the applications? Like, what's the difference? If somebody said I want to build a 6-plex or a triplex or a 9-plex before versus now, what's changed?
You jump to assuming there's no zoning issues.
Sure.
You're jumping straight to building permit.
Let's go there. Let's say that the building is approved subject to whatever constraints you have to make the site work. But like, what's the difference now that they say, okay, no more site plan control?
Honestly, I'm not sure that we have an answer because I don't even know that municipalities have kind of addressed that just yet.
Really? Just too soon?
Yeah, they don't have. They're kind of, it's all new territory for them too. And they're still trying to get their ducks in a row, update their site plan bylaws, update their local policies if they need to. So we don't really know yet.
Interesting. Everybody's just getting it like just a fire hose.
Yeah, we're all trying to figure it out, honestly. And it's difficult, obviously, to give advice to clients because, we kind of think we understand where things are heading, but the implementation of policies and regs are not there yet. So, we've leveraged some of those bill rights and the municipalities have recognized some of that already. But at the same time, we're not sure exactly where that stop line is, right? In terms of where they're going to try and regulate that.
And does this change from city to city, jurisdiction to jurisdiction?
Municipalities do have a tendency to make their own interpretation for certain things within that framework, and the implementation is subject to how they want to address things. The zoning in particular, I think, is really localized from a municipal perspective on some of the things that they deem are more concerning than others. Progressive places will, regulate parking differently than others that are,
right.
That's all they hear is parking concerns, right? So, we the
people want parking for our whatever, tractors and so on.
Whatever.
Yeah, transit. Where do you think the biggest opportunity is for infill builds right now? All across Ontario, Canada, the States? Like, what do you think the biggest opportunity is for infill builders to say, okay, I can actually execute this and make money here, or we can provide more housing, or we can do some creative projects? Like, what's the next thing?
Well, I would say anything that is around a planned infrastructure node, right, for transit. Those are certainly places where there is an inevitability of density for new infill opportunities. I mean, most neighborhoods or municipalities are growing just to meet the demand for housing. There's all kinds of opportunities in almost every municipality that are just presenting themselves, and it's a question of timing for those opportunities to be leveraged for redevelopment.
Gotcha. From a political perspective, let's talk about the paperwork and some of the things that happen behind the scenes. So, like, if a new investor came onto the scene, and if you could take this one, if a new investor came onto the scene and said, okay, where would I start to learn how to do an infill project? Like, what is an official plan? What is a zoning bylaw? Could you describe some of those things that people may not see right off the bat?
Yeah. So sometimes to a layperson, like, those two documents will get mixed up interchangeably, but they're quite different. Like, the official plan is basically like the guiding policy document or the blueprint for a municipality. They're actually required, like, by law to have it, I'm pretty sure, under the Planning Act. So every municipality needs to have an official plan that sets land use designations, which are kind of like broad brush zoning. It's not zoning, but it's like
residential over here, commercial over here, this kind of thing.
That kind of scale, right? With like broad policies, like, oh, if you're within this much distance of like this arterial road, you're permitted higher, more intense land use, right?
Yep.
So the zoning operates underneath that. It's usually on a parcel by parcel basis, and it sets detailed provisions such as like yard setbacks, frontage requirements, specific uses, general provisions, parking standards. So that is supposed to always conform with or comply with the official plan operating above it. And then you can modify zoning through variances, minor variances, or through a zoning bylaw amendment. Official plans can get modified through official plan amendments, which most people try and stay away from because they're just of a larger magnitude. Yeah. But that's basically how they work. Yeah.
And when somebody says, I want to take this farm, and we'll go into subdivisions next, I want to take this farm and I want to build a subdivision. What does that process look like behind the scenes if it's currently agricultural?
It's a big one. Like the first thing you do is, if it's even possible, like, and then above the local official plan, if you're in a 2-tier government like Durham region or Niagara region, you've got a regional official plan that also needs to be adhered to, and they actually set the settlement area boundaries or urban area boundaries as per the province's direction. So, if you're urban, okay, that's a big check mark. Like, you are eligible for development, but there's so many implications. Like, can the site be serviced? Has there been a servicing study by the municipality? Like, is this on a build out list? Like, and then you've got to go through and see if you can update your policies to get to a point where you can even have zoning or land use development entitlement to get to a hypothetical building permit. And These processes can drag on for years, and you need to go through the municipality, do pre-consultation, find out your prescribed requirements, hire a development planning consulting team, and you're going to hire an army of consultants to help you, like your surveyors, your civil engineers, geotechnical engineers, hydrological engineers if you need them, architects, like the list goes on. Noise studies.
It's a lot of moving parts and a lot of maybes.
Yeah.
For a farm.
A lot of maybes.
A lot of maybes. How far are your clients looking in advance to say, okay, in 10 years I can build here, in 15 years I can build here? I've heard as low as 10 or 12. I've heard as many as 50 or 60.
I think there's some developers that are certainly gambling in terms of land banking some things, some land that they've purchased. Bill 23 is kind of one of those things that I think may have paid off for some of those people.
Maybe. Yeah.
We're not necessarily in agreement with some of those decisions because they're in the greenbelt or protected areas we would prefer to see things occur where there's already existing services, right? So the cost of servicing within urban areas is is obviously much less, doesn't have a tax burden for the rest of the municipality, and it's kind of a win-win. We are doing one subdivision size, which is kind of an infill, which is an interesting situation where it's a full community within an existing neighborhood context. It's actually Curtis's project, and
Nice.
it's actually a severance of a very large church property, and it's quite interesting. We're doing some really interesting things there, like rear lanes and the diversity of housing types, ADUs and rear coach houses, and it's pretty groundbreaking for that particular municipality, and we've been very encouraged by staff, which is wonderful.
That's good. It's good to get the support up front.
Yeah.
Right? Like, okay, we're going into this eyes wide open, staff is happy, investors happy, owners happy, you guys are happy, like we can be creative, we can do all of these neat things, walkability, like you talk about. It's good to know on the way in.
It is. Conversely, though, I mean, like if you're talking about like the big production builders or the big guys who are doing the suburban stuff, they're building out their greenfield sprawl model, which obviously has some economics behind it in terms of costs for they've got everything predetermined essentially. So if the consultant's agreeable to that, then they can proceed, and it's generally, because it's kind of the default way of going through the land development process. It's generally easier from that perspective.
This would be like plan of subdivision type of stuff?
Yeah, larger plans of subdivision in greenfield. Now, they are still subject to greenfield policies, which the province has regulated to hit certain density targets and jobs per hectare. Yeah. So I think it does depend still on where you are, but the province has, in their provincial policy statement, set out certain targets for densities. So basically, we're not doing 60-foot lots anymore, right?
Yeah. They're gone.
So
that Victorian house we talked about earlier, that's no more.
So they are, in those provincial documents, do speak to providing more walkable type communities, or complete communities as they put it, and it does sort of speak to having more diversity of housing. Some developers do the minimum to get by and kind of keep with what they've always done in terms of making money. So
from a subdivision perspective, do you think that the biggest opportunity there would be taking that existing subdivision that somebody is currently planning and maybe adding more intensification, like taking off 20 houses and putting a low-rise building? Or where can people take their existing developments and say, let's be a little bit more creative now that policy is changing and we want more density?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it would depend on where you're starting, but generally speaking, we would see a large tract subdivision as an opportunity to build a full-out neighborhood that is truly as complete a community as you can make it. So what that means is that it has a center, right? A definable center. Oftentimes the center is either a park-like setting, or it can be anything really, but it usually comes along with that framed by mixed use or some sort of commercial component where
like a downtown core type of deal?
in some way, but like neighborhood scale. Okay, so you're not going to get the kind of high-rise situation, but you may have some density located around that. So if you think of it, sort of in terms of this parallel, whatever.
Parabola?
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 I don't know.
I think I know the word you're talking about. I can't.
Anyway, if you think of it in terms of that, if you think of it in terms of that, that's where you would find the density, and then from there it kind of spreads out. And actually, to speak to that better, the Congress for New Urbanism has developed a better way of understanding that. So, and it's called the transect, the urban transect. And so they've classified various zones, T1 through T6, T6 being the highest density, sort of very urban condition, and T1 being a very rural condition. And so T3 is actually suburban, not suburban, suburban. Okay, and so you can get a sense of sort of the hierarchy or higher order of density along that sort of transect. Okay, and this was modeled after a natural transect that was used from science perspective. So it's a very interesting way of really understanding that, and from that perspective, if you're talking about form-based codes, which is sort of an add-on to that function, you would be looking at trying to organize how each of those transects would sort of grow up into the next transect as things grow. But that's sort of within the existing urban area for context. So that would be, so if we were doing something like this, it would look like there's a higher order of placemaking, right? So you have a defined center. Around that, you have types of housing that adds itself and contributes to that, and then there would be more lesser density sort of as you go around the periphery. But there's no necessarily, there's no formula to that, but and it could be a corridor connection, there could be different nodes within that, depends on the scale, obviously. So
have you guys seen it's called The Line? They're building it in Dubai. Have you seen this? No. It's a linear city.
Oh,
I don't know how many miles.
I've seen a rendering of it or an image of it. I don't know.
What are your thoughts on a linear city? Like it was, and I might butcher this, but it was something to the effect of like kilometers long, right? And it was basically one Empire State Building on one side of the street, another Empire State Building on the other side of the street, and then dozens of these that line. And they wrap the whole thing with like glass and mirrors so that the sun doesn't penetrate. And inside they've created like these beautiful parks and rivers and all this stuff. It's basically a city that's encapsulated inside of a mall, if you look at it like that, and just as far as the eye can see. What are your thoughts on some kind of crazy looking city like this that we've never seen before?
I just think it's a novelty, and it's not really repeatable and scalable to most contexts. I mean, maybe it works out in the desert there, but doing something like that in North America, I mean, where? How would you scale? I don't know. There's a lot of lost inefficiencies by not having, our downtown high streets and them, the spoke and wheel or it's like a node. And if you do it linearly, sure, that might be good for a transit line, and there's some advantages there, but there's a lot of disadvantages as well. I haven't really looked into it, but it sounds like a novelty. I don't know.
Interesting. Do you think that there's, in some cases, I mean, when they do something like this, it's more for PR than it is for actually building it and constructing it, or it's a political play? Or do you think that maybe Dubai is just ready to take on the world, and they're like, well, we got lots of money, we don't care?
Well, they built those islands, which are going to be underwater, or if they're not already, I don't know.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's just posturing and for show, but it's somewhat experimental. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, if something good came of it, I mean, I can see an issue with having a single line. I mean, what happens if that artery gets clogged somehow, right? Yeah. Then what? You can't get from one end to the next. I mean, stuff happens, right? You have a fire in one of the major buildings, and all the trucks are there dealing with the fire. I don't know.
There's no route redundancy. There's no transportation mobility redundancy, which that would be that's it.
So in a traditional neighborhood, you don't have these dendritic road patterns where they essentially dead into cul-de-sacs, right? What you have is more of a grid system, so that in the case of the example I just gave you, you would be able to fight the fire from a variety of different directions because there's multiple access points to that particular location. And conversely, if you wanted to avoid that area, you have alternative ways of getting around it. So
interesting. We had a guest on the show. His name was Ben Julius. I think he was maybe around episode 10 or 15, something like that. And he was developing west of the city, west of Toronto. And he had a parcel of land where he was trying to develop it and build it. But the problem was that he only had one point of ingress. He had no other point of egress. Right. And the challenge was that he was going to have to go through EP and build a bridge and do all these things to get his second point so that you could always have traffic flow. And it's causing a lot of problems with that build. Right. Is that he can't get that. And this is a subdivision, right? And it's what does that cost in order to justify, with all the studies and all of the stuff that comes along with a bridge, especially a bridge in EP, what does that mean? Right. So that would be very complicated, I would imagine, from the planning perspective.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a big hurdle.
We were doing a development in southern part of Niagara, and I was actually going to bring that up on talking about the transect thing, because it's kind of on the edge of one of their downtowns, and we did an apartment building right flanking the main road, some mixed-use flex row houses. You step back, we go into townhouses fronting a central parkette with some rear lanes, and then further in you go, you're down to the singles. But the reason I bring that up is because our clients there ended up acquiring land in the middle of the application, so we had to redesign everything, and it grew. And we originally only had one entrance coming in, and it was looping, and there might have had to been some sprinklered buildings. But when we resubmitted, and with the new land acquisition, we added a second exit, and the city immediately was like, that was actually a huge concern of ours. So they were thrilled that we had that second egress. But the thing is, it's not always in the cards. Like when you've got, it depends a lot on the lot geometry and like how things work. And obviously building laneways and roads, come with a price tag. So
yeah, I think that's a good talking point too, because really when, in the early days, I think one of the first considerations we would have if someone came to us with a piece of property is, what are the other land acquisition opportunities in neighboring properties? Can you sever off a rear yard and add to this if it's a interior infill condition, right? And we have a couple of those examples as well, where it just makes sense, because you do need oftentimes an alternative access, and acquiring an adjacent property, severing off the rear yard, reselling that house, using that driveway access to leverage all of the larger rear lots that are landlocked essentially. Yep. You do have to think early days conceptually of how you can maximize the value of that land. That's kind of, because frontage is essentially the king, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you have frontage, that's where it's at. But the tricky part to infill is being creative about solving some of those other issues, and fire access, garbage, circulation, frontage for housing. Those are all really big challenges for infill.
So if you guys are looking at a site or a subdivision or infill or what have you, and you say, okay, we think we have some different opportunities here, what is the thought process you go through to effectively identify what highest and best use may be for that land?
We try to do like a opportunities and constraints analysis with our clients first. And then
before acquisition or after, or both?
It could be both.
It could be both.
Yeah.
They could have just tied up the property, for example. Yeah.
And then once we outline where the limits are and opportunities, then we would kind of jump into like doing some preliminary concept plans where we kind of hash out those options. But before that, we usually see like, is there land acquisition opportunities or joint venturing opportunities with your neighbors? And sometimes there are. So that kind of happens around concurrently, and then we go through the municipal process after that, and usually try and bring the most aggressive concept to the municipality, and see, sometimes they bite on it, and if not, then have some in your back pocket as options. So it's this whole strategy thing. Like,
any thoughts on that?
No, I think that's fairly apt. I mean, the concept development, may look like 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 even, to try and figure out what makes most sense, both in terms of what the developer client's looking for to market, and also what, within the context of that particular piece of property and the framework of policy, we think we can be successful in arguing, for approvals. So, really in the early days, working through the design and getting that right, I think is where developers can make the most money, because, as I said that earlier, but I think that leverages the greatest potential. And then, as Curtis says, you take the preferred concept or most aggressive concept to pre-con, and then you get some feedback, and then from there, based on that feedback, you have a better idea of whether or not this is going to fly, right?
Have you guys ever had some pre-cons that just went right off the rails? So you're like, we want to do this, and the city comes back and they're like, absolutely not, we want this, and you're like, we're not even close. Like, we're not even in the same book.
You know what? I don't think that happens too often, actually. We generally have enough of a rapport with staff to kind of gauge where we think they're going. I mean, it's a relationship type thing, so you know. I mean, that does change. There is a pendulum at City Hall with respect to whether they're supporting something. That's a very
diplomatic way of saying
that. But generally speaking, we get a lot of support from staff actually in terms of what we're doing, because it's the urban design stuff is generally very well received. It's easy to sell to staff. It's easy to sell to neighbors. It's easy to even sell to your clients. And you do a nice rendering, and if you end up flipping and selling the property after approvals, you got a pretty picture to go along with approval, right? And so and hopefully that vision continues, but sometimes it doesn't. It depends on the conditions attached to that or the development agreements or what have you. But
yeah. So let's talk about niching down as a planner. So you guys are very specific to a very specific amount of markets, right? You're like, this is what we know, this is what we like, this is what we're good at, right? Why do you prefer to niche into specific markets generally, as opposed to maybe branch out and do stuff in markets that you haven't been to before?
Do you mean geographic markets?
Yeah, geographic.
Yeah, so I would say that from a planning perspective, it tends to be very relationship driven, and at the end of the day, it's a political decision. So knowing the environment, knowing the context of the application, knowing the local planning documents that you're dealing with, all has a lot of bearing on the success of the application and so going back to your earlier question, we're not usually very far apart because we kind of know, we kind of have an intuitive sense of where things are going because we're up on the local politics. We read the local newspaper. We know what the last decisions were. We know what happened at the council meeting.
That's so important.
We have a very contextual idea of the geography of Niagara, certainly where that's our sandbox. And so I think it's important to kind of engage local people to do the work in their environments, right?
Yeah. And on top of that, we have and this would apply to other consultants operating in other areas, but like have close relationships with the co-consultant network in the development industry. So, like we've got like the surveyors we tend to rely upon, like the geotechnical engineers, and the list goes on. And our clients will be like, okay, well, we got to kind of line up these things. So we just go to our go-tos often, and and there's some efficiencies on that, like economically and time-wise for our clients, and so.
Do you think that knife cuts both ways? So and I'm not saying you guys, I'm saying anybody, any planner, any consultant, anything, maybe you have a great relationship today, but you don't have a great relationship tomorrow. The person with the great relationship making the same proposal as the next person might get an approval, but the person that, we tried to pull one over on the town and they don't like this person now, they might get a disapproval, even though it's technically the same. Have you ever been in a situation or heard of people that, they kind of fall off where they lose the rapport with the town and it's no longer symbiotic like it was before?
That doesn't happen with us. We do work hard at maintaining, even if we disagree with staff, and we often do actually.
Sure.
We always find a way to maintain a professional way of addressing the planning issues so that, and if we need to expedite, we bring in the owner for a different role in that, right? In terms of trying to influence something we might not agree with, so that we remain
at arm's length.
Yeah, counterparts. And as a professional planner, you do have to always be objective in your planning opinion,
based on your designation to uphold.
Exactly.
Okay.
So really, that's all we have to offer, essentially, as a planner.
His opinion?
It's kind of crappy when you think about it. It's particularly crappy when politics can override years of experience in academic study. But anyway,
ever been through an MZO?
I've had one on my property that I've worked on. Yes.
Yeah.
But
because that's just purely politics.
Yes.
That's nothing to do with planning at all. The government's just like, build it. Stamp.
Up until a few years ago, they were seldom ever engaged.
Yeah.
Like it's a fairly new, and I think this was again a response to the change that we saw through Bill 23, right? It was this kind of sledgehammer approach of saying, look, there's a problem here, we got to fix it. Yeah. They may have gone a little too far, but nevertheless, something needed to be done, and we do have a housing crisis on our hands. There's no question about that, and we have immigration in the 500,000 or more people coming in every year. So there is a real issue that needs to be solved, and certainly from our perspective, in the past several years, we can say that the bureaucracy of getting approvals and the timelines and cost associated with getting there have been way more than necessary. Yeah. So it's it's
for the same end product, like throw 10 grand here, 5 grand here, 10 grand here.
In other words, there's no benefit to it, right? There's no at the end of the day, there's nothing to be gained. So
have you ever worked in an unorganized territory?
I have not. Those are mostly up north.
Yeah. So what is an unorganized territory for the layperson who doesn't know and hasn't heard of this before?
Well, they don't have a municipal structure per se. So everything is just has to be done into the, like if you have a piece of property and you want to build a house, then it's just has to meet the Ontario Building Code, for example.
So no zoning, just go gung ho.
Pretty much.
Rock and roll. So what prevents somebody from building, and we're going to transition into high rise here. What prevents somebody from building, like, other than market demand? Like like a hospital or a high rise or like any of these crazy projects that line, what prevents somebody from building that up north in an unorganized territory where there is no zoning?
I thought they do. I don't know.
There would be some
regulations.
regulations for servicing for sure.
Okay.
Right. So you do. I mean, most of those places are purely septic systems, for example.
Right.
So you're not going to have multiple dwellings. That's just not going to meet the code, right?
How big would your Weeper field have to be for a 50 unit high rise, right?
Yeah. Well, you wouldn't even get permission for that. That's you would have to get provincial
MOE,
approval, like
yeah.
MOE. So that's not going to happen. So I mean, things are, and I think that's the point. The other point is that there are other checks and balances in the process that are, sometimes the planning overreaches into that are a duplicate effort, right? And so I think that's what this is kind of sort of trying to address.
Okay. So on the topic of high rise, so do you guys think that density would be the solution to a housing crisis? Higher density, better transit, things like that, when you're going vertical instead of urban sprawl?
Parking reduction as well.
Parking reduction. Okay.
Yeah, certainly density is one component. I mean, I'm not necessarily in favor of warehousing people. I think there's a certain scale where it makes sense, and certainly, again, tying this back into transit. I mean, those people, that the densification of people in one location, they need to get to places beyond. So there has to be some means to do that. Higher order transit is definitely one way to do that. And so if the density is structured around a node of higher order transit, then that makes perfect sense. Okay. And then it lessens the demand on automobile requirements too. So generally speaking, I mean, along corridors, around existing transit is where density makes the most sense. And I think most planning documents do agree with that, and or shifting towards that direction.
Okay. What would the difference be between low density and high density in a units per net hectare type of fashion?
It completely depends on the municipality you're in. Like, it comes up in hearings. The public might say, well, this is a high density, and you're laughing because, not because it's like silly, but because
it's a triplex in town or something.
In Toronto, like, I don't know what they call medium density, like 20 stories, like, I don't know. And then in any other smaller town, Ontario, it's completely different. So it's really dependent on like the local municipality, what's the threshold, and they can change as they're, once they update their official plan the next 5 years, they could just rewrite, high density is now at this threshold. And, the thing is with density, and I talk about this a lot with Dan on some of our projects because it comes up a lot. Yeah. Density is a metric. It ends up becoming a really hot topic, and it's another thing that gets weaponized. But, density, I think, is super helpful when you're trying to hit minimum thresholds. It's a way to help measure occupant loads, but it misses the boat on occupant loads when you start putting it as a maximum, because it doesn't even account for bedrooms. Like, you could have a single detached house that's got 6 bedrooms in it, or you could have a triplex that has one bedroom. Well, the occupant load is completely different, but yet that triplex is considered way more dramatic than the single. So it misses the boat on that, which is unfortunate. It's a metric, but it's not always being used properly.
Yeah, it's not a particularly useful metric for understanding compatibility,
right.
in which it's, I think, partly intended to do. I would ask anybody to walk down the street and tell me what the density of any neighborhood is, and nobody would be able to tell you. So it really doesn't have any personal meaning, because it's a number that is really meaningless from the public realm. And so, I think the way it's being used, as Curtis already pointed out, there's some real shortfalls for that, and it's caused a lot of issues from an approval process because it almost always triggers an official plan amendment.
Sure.
And
Even
those
in a
are
place like
major
Toronto?
applications, and it's simply for the sake of meeting this density thing, which is again like this arbitrary number.
Sure. In a place like a bigger downtown core, a Manhattan, a Paris, a Toronto, would that trigger like an OP amendment as well?
I'm not sure that their planning documents speak to density in the same way.
Okay.
I mean, those are areas where they want densification, and I mean, they build skyscrapers all day long.
Yeah.
I mean, there's cranes, hundreds of cranes, right? So, they obviously aren't getting OPAs for each of those projects.
Sure.
Right.
They're building
they've cleared the way
right to the lot line, to the micro nanometer, right?
Yeah.
So they can get as many units in as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. As we wrap this up, where do you guys think that the biggest opportunity moving forward for new investors would be? From a land planning perspective.
Biggest opportunity.
Yeah, what are you guys seeing in your market right now?
Well, sometimes when we get a client come to us with just like in a generic lot, in an urban city, they've got one idea. They're like, oh, like somebody told me I could sever this, and then they come to us and we're like, you're thinking like too small, or this, like sometimes it's like, okay, this thing could get created into like, I know I've seen you guys have done some nifty things before I joined, but like, you're looking at tearing down the house. It's like, how about we keep the house, which has inherent value locked up in it, especially when it's a house in good standing.
Yeah, sure.
And it's like, sure, the zoning doesn't permit semis, but in this case, it might be worth going through the ZBA process to maybe put semis in the back, and you can do an L-shaped through lot geometry and have the parking coming off this side. You've got great urban design here. It's really efficient. It's good for the neighborhood, good for the bottom line for the client. So I think there's a lot of opportunities in getting creative with lot geometry, and hopefully you've got the local municipal official plan is open to that kind of innovation, and the staff is. And that's certainly the area that we're operating in a lot. We're finding
there's certainly some adaptive reuse opportunities, I would say. A lot of churches and schools, if those properties are still available, those are always good opportunities for severances or adaptive reuse of the existing infrastructure. We were involved in a church, for example, that was made into condominium apartments, which is kind of cool.
parking lots too.
Yeah, parking lots. So that's another really good opportunity. Actually, we're also working on a project which is a 15-acre parking lot at a mall. So we're building a neighborhood.
I know this project.
Yeah, we're building a neighborhood in a mall.
Yeah,
which is kind of new. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's all kinds of strip plazas that are just ripe for being repurposed.
Yeah.
Commercial tends to just move around. Like the demand for commercial really isn't growing at the same rate that the housing demand is. And so if you can create mixed use opportunities on that property, assuming the planning regulations support that, I think there's some really good opportunities to, again, densify, but make it so that there's some walkable integration within that neighborhood for the newcomers. So I mean, we definitely think in terms of being a little innovative that way, and
you have to,
and
right?
using what's there. I think there's we don't necessarily see a need to expand the urban boundary because there's so many opportunities if we just think creatively about the built form and the servicing's there. It's a win-win-win, frankly. If the developer can win, the municipality wins from a tax and doesn't have to pay for services, and ultimately, we're creating housing for people. So yeah, I think everybody can win if we look at it in that respect.
This has been so much fun. I mean, I can tell that you guys have a deep chest of knowledge, based on what you do. Obviously, being in the industry for so long and being new to Better Neighborhoods, but also being in this industry for a long time, like you guys both know, like you've got a knack for this. And I love the fact that you're going so deep. with your planning and your infrastructure and your consultants, and being geographic specific to these municipalities that you deal with, so you have that deeper understanding. It's not just a willy-nilly, we'll go plan anywhere wherever we can take the job. It's like, no, this is what we do and this is what we do best. So I think if anything for anybody to take from this episode is A, learn your craft, and B, know your market, right? And I think you guys have executed on that really, really well. So from this side of the mic, from me to you, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
We really enjoyed having the discussion.
This is great. Where can people find out more about you guys and about Better Neighborhoods?
Betterneighborhoods.ca.
And Better Neighborhoods Instagram account.
Yeah. The criticisms. The criticisms. The Instagrams are so good, man.
We like to post some fun reels we're getting in, and then sharing some of our wins.
And we'll be headed to the CNU in Charlotte at the end of the month, and so we'll have a lot of content coming from that, and it's going to be a really terrific stuff to share with everybody.
Very cool. Very cool. Awesome. Thank you guys for being here.
Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah.
There you have it, Dan and Curtis. Don't forget to check out the book at thehighestandbestuse.com. You can get it on Audible, audiobook version now as well, paperback, hardcover, ebook, all this stuff. Hope you enjoyed the podcast. We will see you guys on the next episode.